was the United States has not detected any movements of forces that would indicate that. What it appears to mean is that it was a signal to the United States, first and foremost, that Russian forces have taken steps to protect themselves from potential attack, and the signal is basically don't even try, don't even think about attacking Russia.
What is Russia's nuclear capability? We know that Russia has many nuclear weapons, but how dangerous is it with these weapons?
Well, it's quite dangerous. As I said, around 1,000 warheads on intercontinental ballistic missiles only. There are submarines, there are bombers. Overall, Russia is one of two major nuclear powers. It has more than 4,000 warheads in its arsenal, as the United States actually does. And it is something to consider, and that's the calculation in the Kremlin, that people will be taking these signals seriously and would not interfere on behalf of Ukraine.
Now, you are an expert on Russia's nuclear arsenal. Do you believe that President Vladimir Putin would actually order a nuclear missile strike if he felt threatened?
Well, I certainly hope that he would not. But the problem is that, and what I find very problematic is that he explicitly brought nuclear weapons into this conflict, even as a signal, even at the rhetorical level. And a conflict like that, very complex, could, now that we know that Russia indicated or said actually explicitly that it does consider nuclear weapons to be a factor, things can go in many wrong ways. I think it was good that the United States did not react in a similar fashion. The United States did not indicate that it would want to bring its forces to higher alert. And it was good to see that the UN General Assembly session yesterday, a lot of states called that move, that introduction of nuclear weapons, they called it unacceptable and irresponsible. And I think that should be the message. The reaction should be that nuclear weapons should not belong to any conflict, in fact, but definitely they should not be anywhere clear this conflict.
Okay, here we are with Russia having invaded a sovereign country. It is now at least sending a rhetorical signal about its nuclear weapons. What can be done by the West in this situation to de-escalate what's happening and perhaps bring about some sort of solution that doesn't involve further bloodshed?
Well, that's a very difficult problem, and I think since, as you said correctly, we are dealing with the nuclear armed states here. It's everybody should tread very carefully because there are, as I said, there are possible unexpected and unpredictable developments here, and we would think that a use of nuclear weapons is unconceivable, but then this whole invasion was inconceivable just about a week ago. So I think the message should be very firm and clear, as I said, and not just from the West, but from other countries as well. that it is, as I said, it's irresponsible and unacceptable to wave your nuclear weapons around the way that Russia did.
Pavel Podvig, an expert on Russia's nuclear capabilities, thank you very much for talking with us.
Thanks for having me.
Turkey says it will block Russian warships from the key Bosphorus and Dardanelles straits, prohibiting access for naval vessels to the Black Sea. The Montreux Convention of 1936 gives Turkey the right to bar warships of, quote, belligerent countries from the two straits. Several Russian warships have sailed through the straits in the past weeks. Turkey said it was closing the waterway to prevent an escalation of the war. Here's how Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan announced the move.
Montreux Sözleşmesi'nin
We are determined to use the authority given to us by the Montreux Convention regarding the marine traffic in straits to prevent an escalation of the crisis.
kullanma kararındayız.
As we've always said, we are in favor of respecting Ukraine's sovereignty, political unity, and territorial integrity.
Gösterilmesinden yanayız.
We see Russia's attack on Ukraine as unacceptable and appreciate the fight of the Ukrainian people and administration.
Ve halkının verdiği mücadeleyi takdir ediyoruz.
Let's cross straight over to our correspondent, Yulia Hanu, standing by for us in Istanbul. Yulia, tell us more about the Turkish president's announcement. What exactly has he decided?
Well, first of all, it's not very clear right now which kind of impact Turkey's decision, the president's decision, will have on the conflict there, on the war, but it certainly sends a strong message. We heard the president talk last night, but we also heard Turkey's foreign minister Mevlut Çavuşoğlu say, and let me quote him here, Turkey has alerted both countries of the region and elsewhere not to pass warships through the Black Sea. We are applying the Montreux Convention. Now, you have mentioned that international treaty from 1936 already, the Montreux Convention. It usually governs the free movement of commercial ships through the Dardanelles and Bosporus Straits in peacetime, but it also grants Turkey the right to limit, to stop warships, military vessels in times of war. Now, Turkey has been kind of hesitant to refer to the conflict as officially as a war until Sunday. That's when they changed their rhetoric. They had previously always been talking about a military operation. On Sunday, they suddenly started calling Russia's assault on Ukraine a war, and that legally paved the way for the move that we are seeing now. But of course, it remains to be seen what will happen if a Russian warship attempts to pass these two waterways on their way to the Black Sea. What will Turkey do? That's the big question.
Okay, so a real sea change, as it were, with Turkey adopting language that Russia does not like to hear, describing the conflict in Ukraine as a war and not just a military operation. That is an important development in itself. But we're looking at two specific waterways here that Turkey is blocking with respect to Russian warships, the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus. How important are these waterways?
Oh, they are strategically very, very important, and that's why Ukraine had asked Turkey already on the first day of the Russian invasion to close these two waterways to Russian warships, so they cannot send reinforcements to the Black Sea. The Dardanelles and the Bosporus Straits are the only way in and out of the Black Sea. They connect the Mediterranean with the Black Sea. Russia has its Black Sea fleet over there, a number of warships that, as far as we know, are being used in the assault on Ukraine right now. So there is an interest there from Ukraine for Turkey to block the passage of warships, Russian warships. It is also economically very important. It's important for agricultural trade, for oil trade. Russia and Ukraine together, let me just mention that figure, account for more than a quarter of the global trade in wheat and about a fifth of corn. And that trade was completely thrown into chaos when the Russian invasion started and Ukraine had to shut down its ports in the Black Sea. So it is a crucial region geopolitically, economically.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, he said that Turkey will neither abandon Ukraine and will abandon neither Ukraine nor Russia. What does that mean?
Well, geographically, you have to know that Turkey shares a maritime border with both countries, and Turkey, the Turkish government, has cultivated both good relations economically and politically with both countries, Russia and Ukraine, in recent years. And that has brought the Turkish president in a very delicate position. We have seen him in recent weeks and days trying to balance Turkey's interests and obligations towards its ally, Ukraine. Turkey is a NATO partner. It has sold combat drones to Ukraine with, on the other hand, its ties with Moscow, because the Turkish president knows that he cannot afford an economic fallout with Russia. Turkey depends too much on trade with Russia, on energy supplies, on agricultural trade, on Russian tourists even. So there is a lot at stake for the Turkish government, and that explains the language here. That explains why Turkish president is so keen on emphasizing that he won't abandon Ukraine, but also Russia.
Before I let you go, Yulia, just give us a quick idea of how Turkish people are reacting to the war in Ukraine.
Well, what we haven't seen here in Turkey, in the big cities, are protests in support of Ukraine, for example, as we've seen in Berlin, where tens of thousands of people took to the streets in recent days to express their solidarity. We haven't seen something like that. But what we do see is that there is a lot of media coverage. It's one of the top topics here on most of the television channels. There's a lot of live coverage from Ukraine and from Russia as well. But I guess the public doesn't take a clear stance here because of the political situation and because of the balancing act we've seen here by the Turkish government. But of course, we've seen a lot of comments also on Twitter, on social media, but no larger protests, only smaller protests organized by Ukrainians mostly living here in Istanbul.
Yulia, thank you very much. Our correspondent, Yulia Han there in Istanbul. The world of sports is also moving to isolate Russia after its invasion of Ukraine. Football's world governing body, FIFA, and its European counterpart, UEFA, have suspended Russian teams from all competitions. The decision, in effect, bans Russia from the upcoming World Cup playoffs and the 2022 World Cup itself. FIFA had already said Russia would have to play its matches on neutral ground without spectators, but Poland, Sweden, the Czech Republic, and England then said they would not play against Russia. You're watching DW News from Berlin. Just a quick recap of what's been happening in Ukraine on the ground. Russian troops are continuing their advance on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Satellite images appear to show a convoy of military vehicles stretching more than 60 kilometers just north of the city. Air raid sirens sounded in the capital early on Tuesday morning. Don't forget, you can always get DW News on the go. Just download our app from Google Play or from the App Store. That'll give you access to all the latest news from around the world, as well as push notifications for any breaking news. And if you're part of a news story yourself, including in Ukraine, you can also use the DW app to send us photos and videos of what's happening around you. You are watching DW News from Berlin. I'll be back in just a couple of minutes with more. And of course, you can get news and information anytime you want on our website. That's dw.com. You'll also find us on YouTube and Twitter. Thanks for watching.
Use nuclear weapons. Is the conflict entering a new dimension?
To the point. In 30 minutes on DW. They've had no peace for 4 decades. The people of Iraq. Their country is devastated, and there's no end to the violence. How did it come to this? Key eyewitnesses reveal an unprecedented story.
He behaved exactly like Saddam Hussein, and the poison spread from there onwards.
Misery, misery, no more life. The great documentary series, Iraq, Destruction of a Nation, starts March 4th on DW.
This is DW News coming to you live from Berlin. Russian forces close in on Kiev. Satellite images show a 60-kilometer-long convoy just north of the city. Ukrainian forces have managed to fend off Russian attacks so far. Also coming up, rockets rain down on Kharkiv. Authorities say almost a dozen residents have been killed and hundreds injured in Ukraine's second-largest city, where there's now fear of a food shortage. And a neighborly welcome. People in eastern Poland organized to help fleeing Ukrainians and give them a ride, a hot meal, and a place to stay. Hello, I'm Terry Martin. Thanks for joining us. Russian troops are continuing their advance on the Ukrainian capital, Kiev. Satellite images appear to show a convoy of military vehicles stretching more than 60 kilometers just north of the city. The convoy includes hundreds of armored vehicles, tanks, and artillery. It was reported to be about 25 kilometers from Kiev. The Ukrainian forces have held off earlier attacks by Russian forces near the capital, destroying several Russian vehicles close to the city center. Air raid sirens have been sounding in Kiev in recent hours. There are reports today of shelling in the port city of Mariupol and in Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv. On Monday, Russian forces bombarded Kharkiv, destroying dozens of residential buildings. Ukraine authorities say several residents have been killed in the ongoing attack.
An onslaught in Kharkiv, a city with 1.5 million residents. Ukraine says Russia targeted residential buildings with volleys of rockets. People in a maternity ward forced to flee to a bomb shelter. Ukraine's president has condemned the bombardment, calling for it to be brought before an international tribunal.
Today, Russian forces brutally attacked Kharkiv using rockets. Clearly a war crime. Peaceful city, peaceful residential areas, no military facilities. Dozens of eyewitness records prove this was not a mistake, but the deliberate destruction of people. The Russians knew where they were shooting.
Moscow denies the accusations. Ever more civilians are joining the fight to push back Russian troops from Kharkiv.
I have 6 children at home and a wife. I'm from Kharkiv. The day before yesterday, I decided to take up arms and protect my city. When I made my decision, of course my wife and my 10-year-old son cried. They tried to stop me from joining the fighters, but finally they understood. It's our land that we have to defend. We can't back down.
Ukraine is also inviting foreigners to fight for the country as it braces for a new phase in the war.
Let's bring in Maria Adea here, a resident in Kharkiv. Maria, thanks for being with us. Thanks for joining us under these very difficult circumstances. How are things looking in Kharkiv right now?
Hello, thank you for having me. So today, the night was pretty calm. In the morning, we've got reports that the great shelling started. So again, this morning, 2 residential buildings were destroyed by Russian missile systems Grad. And then about 2 a.m. here, I've heard a very loud explosion very close to where I live. So, and immediately it turned out that a Russian rocket got into the building of the Kharkiv regional administration, the main administrative building in Kharkiv, which is situated just in the center of the city on the main square across of the university and near many residential buildings as well. No military object there at all.
Now, we're just looking at some of the pictures of that explosion you described. That would appear to have happened just a short while ago. Is that right?
Yes, it happened exactly almost less than an hour ago, and there was a major explosion. And why this building is so symbolic is because it has Ukrainian flag on top of it. And already in 2014, Russian forces tried to get control over Kharkiv, and they have put Russian flag on that building. So, and that's why, you know, this has a symbolic meaning also for Ukrainians and for Putin, who wants to put Kharkiv on the knees, but it won't happen. But now what he is doing, he is actually having people here, residents in Kharkiv, as hostages, because, you know, under the shelling that goes on every hour, there is no possibility for food supplies, for medical supplies, for any kind of assistance.
Are you planning to stay in Kharkiv, Maria?
Yes, I do plan to stay because this is my home and I want to defend it as much as I can. So given any help that might be needed to people and, I don't know, volunteering, given medical aid, because, you know, our men are now fighting on the streets with Russian troops that are around on the outskirts of Kharkiv. So yesterday, the day before, they were attacking from the 3 sides, and now they're killing civilians. We have the reports of 2 deaths among children, and that is something horrible. And that is why we are here ready to fight to the last end, because we have no other option. It's our home and we want to defend it.
What about basic supplies? Do you have access to essentials like food and water? Are people there able to get by?
Well, it's already running. We are running out of supplies. So yesterday there were big lines in front of the shops with supermarkets, small supermarkets and bread kiosks, because already it's almost nothing left, and you can only get a little from what is left. And the bread, you can buy only 1 loaf for 1 person. So basically, if the shelling continues, and it looks like that's what Putin has in mind, so the town, the city will be in blockade, because there will be no possibility for food supplies and medical supply, what is more important. And that is why we are like on the edge of the humanitarian crisis, and are asking international humanitarian organizations to urgently begin supplying Kharkiv and other cities under Russian attack with what is needed, with essentials.
How are people in Kharkiv dealing with this situation? Are they able to find shelter in the city to be safe?
Well, we have metro underground is used as a shelter, so I know many families who spend their days and nights with their children. Also, people hide in the basements, and we have especially in the residential areas which are being hit by Russian Grad missile system systematically. So they spend their whole days, you know, not being able to come out of the basement, like sitting there for days with the children locked there. And others who can fight with arms, they go to territorial defense units and go patrol the streets and participate as much as they can in pushing back Russian troops out of the city when they try to come in.
Maria, thank you very much. That was Maria Avdieva, a resident in Kharkiv. Thanks for talking with us. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Well, economic sanctions against Russia are starting to have an impact. The ruble has dropped to record lows. For more on that, we're joined by Natalie Ann Jaresko. She was Ukraine's Minister of Finance between 2014 and 2016. She joins us now from San Juan, Puerto Rico. Thanks for being with us. Natalie, first of all, give us your personal perspective on what's been happening in Ukraine since the invasion began.
Thank you for having me today. This is the most tragic situation I could have ever imagined in my life. I was Minister of Finance during the initial invasion and occupation of eastern Ukraine and illegal annexation of Crimea, but this is nothing in comparison. This is a clear attempt to annihilate civilians. And what's happening in Kiev, in Kharkiv, in Mariupol, in Kherson is just horrible. It's tragic.
What do you make, Natalie, of the severe financial and economic sanctions that have been imposed on Russia as a consequence of its invasion of Ukraine? Do you think that those sanctions will do anything to help end this war?
I'm certainly hopeful they will. I think we got off to a very slow start with the sanctions. With EU leadership in the United States this weekend, I think the sanctions against the Central Bank of Russia have made a real difference, and that's why you're seeing the collapse of the ruble. And I'm hopeful that together with what I hope are more broad sanctions against all state banks, against all state oil and gas companies, which have not yet been sanctioned. And that is really critical because right now, they are still earning money and financing this war without those sanctions in place. So I think that we've gotten a good start to the sanctions. They are painful in terms of the currency, but we need to do more to stop the West from financing this war. How can we, on one hand, be providing weaponry, and on the other hand, spending about $700 million a day between the US, UK, and EU purchasing Russian goods? We have to stop.
When you say Russian goods, I presume you're speaking primarily about gas and oil. But anyway, sanctions cut both ways, of course. How are all these sanctions likely to affect other countries with business interests in Russia?
Well, I hope it puts everyone on notice. They need to immediately divest of all of their investments in Russia. In the United States, ESG principles are very popular here. How do we measure our environmental, our social, and our governance principles as we manage our businesses, managing more away from profit and towards a broader set of objectives? If we're going to walk the walk, we have to divest and we have to boycott. We cannot finance the war.
Natalie, thank you very much for talking with us. That was Ukraine's former finance minister, Natalie Ann Jaresko. Well, the first emergency United Nations General Assembly session in decades opened with a minute's silence for those killed in Ukraine. More than 100 nations have signed up to speak out about Russia's invasion at the session, which continues today. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres spoke of a moment of truth for humanity.
A minute of silence to mourn those killed in Russia's days-long ground and air attack on Ukraine. Then nation after nation took to the podium, condemning President Vladimir Putin's war and his decision to put Russia's nuclear forces on high alert.
Excellency, we are facing a tragedy for Ukraine, but also a major regional crisis with potentially disastrous implications for us all. Yesterday, Russian nuclear forces were put on high alert. This is a chilling development. The mere idea of a nuclear conflict is simply inconceivable.
A war of this scale seemed inconceivable just days before the invasion. Ukraine's envoy to the UN spoke passionately about civilian suffering in his country and warned that global peace is at stake.
If Ukraine does not survive, international peace will not survive. If Ukraine does not survive, the United Nations will not survive. Have no illusions.
Russia's envoy accused the media of creating fake news about what Putin calls a special military operation and blamed Ukraine for causing the war by mistreating Russian supporters in breakaway regions. This definitely persuaded us that we could no longer ignore the suffering to people in Donbass. The leaders of breakaway regions turned to us for military support. Monday's emergency session of the UN General Assembly lays the groundwork for a resolution members will vote on later in the week. In part, it demands Russia immediately stops its attack and withdraws all troops from Ukraine.
The International Criminal Court in The Hague will launch an investigation on the situation in Ukraine following Russia's